I still remember the exact moment everything started to feel off. Did you enjoy the investment account I set up for you, Mom? My son's voice was light, casual, almost proud. I was standing by the kitchen counter, holding a ceramic pie dish that was still warm from the oven. Pumpkin, his favorite since he was a boy. The smell of cinnamon and nutmeg filled the room, wrapping itself around everything like it always did on Thanksgiving. But something about his question didn't belong in that moment. I turned to look at him. What account? The words came out slower than I expected. Not confused, just precise. And that's when I noticed it. The silence. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it spread across the dining room like something invisible, something heavy. My son didn't answer right away. His smile, still there, shifted just slightly. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but I did. I've been watching people for over 65 years, and I know the difference between a smile and a reaction. Behind him, my daughter-in-law, Claire, froze for just a second, one hand resting on the back of the chair, fingers tightening ever so slightly against the wood. Then she let go, smoothed her dress, smiled, too quickly. "I'm glad you're here," I said, placing the pie gently on the table. My voice sounded steady. It always does. "Stay with me until the end of this story, and tell me where you're watching from. I'd like to know how far this reaches." I picked up a knife, cut clean through the center, but my mind wasn't on the pie anymore, because something didn't add up. The table looked perfect. It always did. White linen cloth, the good china, the one with the gold trim I only used on holidays. 4 plates, 4 sets of silverware, crystal glasses that caught the late afternoon light just enough to make everything feel warmer than it really was. I had set this table the same way for over 30 years, even after my husband passed, especially after. Routine has a way of holding things together when everything else starts to come apart. "Mom, you okay?" My son's voice again, softer now, watching me. "I'm fine," I said. And I was, at least on the surface. I served the pie, one slice at a time. The knife moved smoothly. My hands didn't shake. They never do. Not in front of people. But I could feel it. That quiet shift in the room. Like a draft coming from a door you didn't realize was open. "So," he said, picking up his fork, "about the account." There it was again. He said it like it was already established, like it was something we had discussed before, something I should remember, something I should have. I placed the pie server down. "What account, David?" This time, I used his name. Not honey, not sweetheart. David. His fork paused halfway to his mouth, and that's when Claire looked at him. Just a glance. Quick. Sharp. Enough to say something without saying anything at all. I saw it. I always see those things. "Mom," he said, a small laugh slipping into his voice. "The one I set up for you a couple years ago? The investment fund? For your retirement?" A couple years ago. Investment fund. For my retirement. I repeated the words silently in my head, one by one, like I was testing how they fit together. They didn't. "I don't have an investment account," I said. Simple, flat, true. And for the first time that evening, the room cracked. Not loudly, not in a way anyone else would describe as dramatic, but I saw it in his eyes. Confusion. Real confusion. "Of course you do," he said. "I had my assistant handle everything. It was supposed to be transferred into your name. Monthly distributions, too." Monthly distributions. That lingered longer than the others, because I knew exactly how much money I had every month. I knew what my groceries cost, what my medication cost, how many times I had stood in the pharmacy line, calculating whether I could afford both. There were no distributions. There was no extra money. There was just enough. Barely. "That's strange," I said quietly. And I meant it, because now something was very, very wrong. Claire stood up, too suddenly,
"Oh, I just remembered," she said, already reaching for her phone. "I need to make a quick call. It's about tomorrow." Tomorrow. Of course. There's always a tomorrow when someone wants to leave a room too quickly. She walked toward the kitchen. Not fast, but not slow either. Just fast enough. David watched her though, then looked back at me. His expression had changed. The confidence was gone, replaced by something sharper. "Mom," he said, lowering his voice slightly, "you're telling me you never received anything? No paperwork, no deposits, nothing?" "Nothing." The word echoed. I shook my head. "No." And I didn't look away, because I needed him to see that I wasn't mistaken. I wasn't confused. I wasn't forgetting. I had spent the last 3 years learning how to survive on less than I ever thought I would have to. You don't forget something like that. Not at 65. Not after losing everything once already. "That's not possible," he said. But it wasn't a statement anymore. It was a question. And I could hear it, the doubt. Not in me, in something else, something behind him, something that had just walked into the kitchen. I could hear her voice, low, muffled, too quiet to make out the words. But the tone told me enough. Urgent, tight, controlled. I stood there for a moment, staring at the table, at the pie, at the small details I had arranged so carefully. And suddenly they didn't matter, because something else had taken their place. A question, a very simple one. If the money existed and I never received it, then where did it go? I walked slowly toward the kitchen, not rushing, not making a sound, just walking. Each step measured, each breath steady. Because I had learned something over the years. You don't rush toward the truth. You let it reveal itself. Claire was standing with her back to me, phone still pressed to her ear, but she wasn't speaking anymore. She was listening. And when she heard my footsteps, she turned, too quickly. Her smile appeared before her eyes caught up. "Everything okay?" she asked. Too bright, too smooth, too practiced. I nodded. "Yes," I said. And for a moment, we just looked at each other. No words, just silence. But not the same silence from before. This one was different. This one had weight, because now I knew. Not everything, not yet, but enough. Enough to understand that something had been happening right in front of me, and I hadn't seen it. Or maybe I hadn't wanted to.
We went back to the table, finished dinner, spoke about small things, weather, traffic, plans for Christmas. Normal conversation. Perfectly normal. And that was the strangest part, because underneath it, something was unraveling, and no one was saying it out loud. Later that night, after they left, I stood alone in my kitchen. The dishes were done. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I opened the drawer where I kept my mail. Bills, receipts, statements. I went through them one by one, slowly, carefully, like I was looking for something I didn't yet understand. And that's when I noticed it. A gap. Not something obvious, not something anyone else would catch, but I did, because I pay attention. There were months missing. Statements that should have been there weren't. I stopped, my hand resting on the edge of the counter, and for the first time that day, I didn't feel confused. I felt certain. Something didn't just go wrong. Something had been done, deliberately, quietly, over time. I closed the drawer, turned off the kitchen light, and stood there in the dark for a moment, because I realized something I should have realized sooner. This wasn't about a missing account. This wasn't about a mistake. This was about trust, and someone had been using mine, without me ever knowing. I took a slow breath and whispered, almost to myself, "That's okay," because they still thought I didn't understand. They still thought I wouldn't notice. They still thought I would stay exactly where they put me. And that
was going to be their biggest mistake.
The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, not because I had somewhere to be, but because something was already waiting for me. I could feel it before my feet even touched the floor. That quiet tension from the night before, it hadn't gone away. It had settled, deeper, heavier. I sat at the edge of my bed for a moment, looking at the soft morning light coming through the curtains, the same light I had woken up to for years. It used to feel comforting. Now it felt different, like it was showing me things I had missed, or maybe things I had chosen not to see. I made coffee, black, no sugar, the way I've taken it since my husband passed. Simple, controlled, predictable. I poured it into the same mug, white porcelain, slightly chipped at the handle. I never replaced it. Some things don't need replacing. Others, you don't realize they've already been replaced. That thought stayed with me longer than it should have. I stood by the kitchen window, watching the empty street. A quiet suburban block. Neatly trimmed lawns, mailboxes lined up like they were all part of the same story. But every house holds something different, something private, something no one else sees. And suddenly, I wasn't so sure about mine anymore. I walked back to the drawer, the one with the mail. I opened it again, slowly, carefully, because I wasn't just looking anymore. I was searching. And that's when I realized something else. The gaps weren't random. They were consistent. Every few months, a missing statement, then another, then another. Not enough to alarm someone who wasn't paying attention, but enough to matter to someone like me. I pulled out what I had, spread them across the table, lined them up, month by month, year by year. And that's when I saw it, a pattern, not clear, not obvious, but there, like something hiding just beneath the surface. "That's strange," I whispered. But it wasn't just strange anymore. It was intentional. I sat down, picked up one of the envelopes, ran my finger along the edge. Unopened. That shouldn't have been possible. I open everything. Bills, letters, even junk mail. It's a habit you develop when every dollar matters. You don't let things sit. You don't forget. So how did this one stay sealed? I turned it over, checked the date. 3 months ago. I would have remembered that, unless I didn't receive it when I should have. That's when I realized something small, but important. My mail doesn't come directly to my door. It goes to the box at the end of the street. Shared, accessible, easy, too easy. I stared at the envelope a little longer than necessary, and for the first time, a possibility crossed my mind. Not a conclusion, not yet, just a possibility. Someone could have taken it. Someone could have decided what I see and what I don't. I exhaled slowly. "No," I said out loud, because that sounded too extreme, too deliberate, too calculated. But then again, so did an investment account I never received. I folded the papers back together, but I didn't put them away. Not this time. Instead, I reached for my phone, paused, then put it back down. Too soon. If something was happening, I needed to understand it first, not react to it. That's when I realized I had been reacting my whole life, adjusting, adapting, making things easier for everyone else. And maybe that was the problem. I sat there for a long time, long enough for the coffee to go cold, long enough for the house to feel unfamiliar, not physically, but emotionally, like I was sitting in a place I knew but didn't fully understand anymore. That's when another thought surfaced. When I didn't like, but couldn't ignore. If money had been sent to me regularly,
and I never saw it. Then someone else did. And there weren't many people who had access. Not really. Not if I was being honest. I stood up, walked into the hallway, looked at the small framed photos on the wall. David as a child. Messy hair. Big smile. Holding a baseball glove that was almost bigger than his arm. I remember that day. I remember everything about that day. The way he ran toward me. The way he laughed. The way he said, "Mom, look." I smiled faintly, then looked away. Because the man who sat across from me last night wasn't that boy anymore. And I wasn't sure when that changed.
I went back to the kitchen, picked up my phone again, scrolled, contacts, names, familiar, safe. Then I stopped. On one name, Martin Reynolds, my husband's attorney, still in my phone, even after all these years. I hadn't called him since the will was finalized. There had never been a reason. Until now. I hovered over the call button. Didn't press it. Not yet. Because something inside me said, there's more. There's something you're still not seeing, and if you move too fast, you might miss it. I set the phone down again, turned back to the table, to the papers, to the pattern. And then, another detail surfaced, one I should have noticed sooner. The dates. They didn't just skip randomly. They aligned with visits, family visits, holidays, times when David and Claire were here, times when things were busy, distracting, full. That's when I realized the missing pieces weren't lost. They were removed. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not yet. Something colder, clearer, like a lens finally coming into focus. I walked to the sink, washed my hands slowly, dried them carefully, every movement deliberate. Because now, I wasn't guessing anymore. I was observing. Later that afternoon, I drove to the mailbox, the one at the end of the street. I hadn't planned to, but something told me to check, just in case. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the pavement. Everything looked normal, quiet, still. I opened the box, reached inside. Bills, coupons, nothing unusual. Until I saw it. An envelope. Different, thicker, addressed to me, but not placed neatly with the others. It was pushed slightly to the back, almost hidden. I pulled it out, turned it over. No return address. That was the first thing. The second, it had already been opened. I stood there for a moment, holding it, feeling the weight of it in my hand. And that's when I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to say out loud yet. This wasn't carelessness. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a mistake. Someone had been going through my mail, on purpose, for a long time. I slid the contents out, looked at the numbers, the formatting, the language, and even though I didn't understand everything immediately, I understood enough. Enough to know this was money, and it had been moving, regularly, without me. I folded the paper carefully, placed it back inside the envelope, closed the mailbox, and stood there a little longer than necessary, because now, the question wasn't if, it was who. I got back in my car, hands steady, mind clearer than it had been in years, because something had finally clicked. All the small moments, the strange glances, the missing pieces, they weren't separate. They were connected. And I had been standing in the middle of it the entire time, without seeing it. I started the engine, but didn't drive right away, because one final thought settled in. Quiet, precise, unavoidable. If someone had been controlling what I saw, then they believed I would never question it. They believed I would never look deeper. They believed I wouldn't fight back. I let out a slow breath, then finally whispered, "That's where you're wrong." Because now,
I knew exactly where to start looking next. And this time, I wasn't going to miss anything. The next time I saw them, everything looked normal. Too normal. That was the first thing that bothered me. It was Sunday, late afternoon. The kind of quiet suburban day where everything feels predictable. Lawns freshly cut, neighbors walking their dogs. The same rhythm I had trusted for years. And yet, I found myself noticing things I had never noticed before. Or maybe I had noticed them and ignored them. They arrived 10 minutes late. Not unusual. But Claire stepped out of the car first. That was new. She usually waited for David. Small detail, but details matter. She smiled the moment she saw me. Warm, polished, practiced. "Hi," she said, walking toward me like nothing had changed. Like Thursday night had never happened. Like there was no missing account, no opened mail, no quiet tension sitting just beneath the surface. I smiled back, just enough. "Hi, Claire." And for a second, our eyes held. Not long, but long enough. Because something passed between us. Not words, not even emotion. Recognition. David followed behind her, keys in hand, expression neutral. Too neutral. "Mom," he said, giving me a quick hug. Brief, light, almost careful, like he wasn't sure how much contact was appropriate. That's when I realized he knew something was wrong. He just didn't know what. Yet. We went inside. I had already set the table. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. The same meal I've made for years. Comfort food, predictable, safe. But tonight, it felt like a stage, and we were all playing roles. Dinner started quietly. Forks, plates, the soft clink of silverware. Normal sounds. But underneath, there was something else. Something tight, like a conversation waiting to happen, and no one willing to start it. Claire spoke first. She always does. "So, how have you been?" she asked, reaching for her water glass. Her tone was light, casual, but her eyes were watching me, carefully. "I've been fine," I said, and I held her gaze just a second longer than necessary, because I wanted her to feel it, that shift, that awareness.
David cleared his throat. "I've been meaning to follow up about the account," he said. There it was, again. But this time he didn't sound confident. He sounded unsure, like he had been thinking about it since Thursday, like it hadn't sat right with him either. "I've been thinking about it too," I replied. Simple, measured, true. Claire's fork paused midair, just for a fraction of a second. Then she continued eating, like nothing had happened. But I saw it. I always do. "I've checked my records," I continued, cutting a small piece of chicken. "I don't have anything that matches what you described." Silence. Not heavy this time. Sharper, more focused. David frowned slightly. "That doesn't make sense," he said. "There should be statements, transfers, documentation." Documentation. I almost smiled, because I had seen some of it. Not all, but enough. "Maybe something got lost," Claire said quickly, too quickly. She didn't look at me. She looked at David. That was the second thing. I set my fork down, not abruptly, just deliberately. Maybe. And I let the word hang there, because I wanted to see what they would do with it. David leaned back slightly in his chair, thinking, processing. Claire took a sip of water, her hand steady, but her fingers wrapped a little too tightly around the glass. "That's strange," David said again, and this time it sounded different. Not confused, concerned. Because now he wasn't just questioning the situation, he was questioning the outcome. I watched them both, carefully, quietly, and that's when I realized something else. They weren't reacting the same way. David looked like someone trying to solve a problem. Claire looked like someone trying to manage one. "I can call my assistant," David said, reaching for his phone. "No," Claire said, too fast, too sharp. The word cut through the room. Then she smiled, softened her tone. "I mean, maybe later. It's Sunday. Let's not get into work stuff right now." Work stuff. That's what she called it. Not money, not accounts,
not missing information. Work. That's when I realized she was reframing it, minimizing it, controlling the narrative. David hesitated, just for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, you're right. But he didn't sound convinced. And I noticed that too.
We finished dinner, talked about small things, again, weather, neighbors, holiday plans. The same surface-level conversation people use when they don't want to go deeper. But this time, I wasn't part of it. Not really. I was observing, listening, watching. After dessert, Claire stood up to clear the plates. "I've got it," she said. Always helpful, always polite, always in control of something. I followed her into the kitchen. Not immediately, just a few seconds later. She was at the sink, running water, rinsing dishes, her back to me. The sound of the faucet filled the room, but not enough to cover the silence between us. "You've been busy," I said. Not a question, a statement. She didn't turn around. "Just the usual," she replied. Light, even, careful. I stepped closer, not too close, just enough. Going through my mail must take time. The water kept running, but her hands stopped, just for a second, then continued. "That's a strange thing to say," she said, still not turning around, still not looking at me. I didn't respond right away, because I didn't need to. The silence was doing the work. She turned off the water, finally, slowly, dried her hands, carefully, then turned to face me, and smiled, again. But this time, it didn't reach her eyes. "I think you're overthinking things," she said, soft, measured, controlled. That's when I realized something important. She wasn't denying it, not directly. She was redirecting it. "I don't think so," I said, and my voice didn't change. Not louder, not sharper, just certain. For a moment, neither of us moved. The kitchen felt smaller, quieter, like the walls were holding their breath. Then David's voice came from the other room. "Everything okay?" Claire's smile returned instantly. "Yeah," she called back, bright, effortless, convincing. She walked past me, light steps, calm posture, perfect control. But as she passed, I noticed something. Her phone, in her hand, screen lit, a message open, just for a second, just long enough. Numbers, transfers, dates, amounts, more than I expected, more than I had imagined. I didn't say anything. I didn't react. I didn't even slow down, because now I didn't need to guess anymore. I had seen enough. That night, after they left, I didn't go to the drawer. I didn't check the mail. I didn't sit in the dark. Instead, I sat at the table, hands folded, mind clear, because something had changed. Not the situation, that had been there all along, but me. I reached for my phone, scrolled to a name I hadn't touched in years, and this time I didn't hesitate. I pressed call. It rang once, twice, then a voice. Martin Reynolds. Study. Professional. Familiar. "Martin," I said. "It's been a while." Pause. Then recognition. "Of course. How can I help you?" I looked at the empty chair across from me, the one my husband used to sit in, and for the first time since Thursday, I felt something close to certainty. "I think," I said slowly, "something has been happening with my finances." A pause. Short, but meaningful. "What kind of something?" he asked. I glanced at the envelope on the table, at the missing months, at the pattern, at everything that no longer felt like coincidence. "The kind," I said, "that doesn't happen by accident." Silence. Then, "I see," he replied. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't going to stay quiet for much longer, because the next step wasn't about noticing anymore. It was about proving it. And I had a feeling, once the truth came out, nothing in this family was going to look the same again. Martin didn't ask many questions on the phone. That was the first thing I noticed. Most people would. They would want details, numbers, explanations. But Martin, he listened. And sometimes, silence tells you more than questions ever could. "Can you come in tomorrow?" he asked. His tone was steady, professional. But there was something underneath it, something alert. "Yes," I said, no hesitation, because by then I already knew this wasn't something I could handle alone. That night, I didn't sleep much, not because I was worried, but because my mind wouldn't stop working. Piece after piece, moment after moment, everything I had seen, everything I had ignored, it was all starting to line up, too cleanly. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the same ceiling I had stared at the night my husband passed. Back then, I felt empty. Now, I felt aware, and that was worse. That's when I realized something I hadn't fully allowed myself to think before. This didn't start recently. No, this had been happening for a long time, maybe years, and I had been there the whole time, watching, living, trusting. I turned my head slightly, looked at the nightstand. His watch was still there. I never moved it, never touched it. Some things deserve to stay exactly where they were left, because they remind you of what was real and what wasn't. Morning came too quickly, or maybe I just never really slept. I got dressed slowly. Simple clothes, neutral colors, nothing that would draw attention, because today I wasn't going to react. I was going to observe. Martin's office hadn't changed. Same building, same quiet hallway, same understated elegance, the kind that doesn't try to impress because it doesn't need to. He greeted me with a nod. No unnecessary warmth, no forced sympathy, just recognition. "Come in," he said. I sat down across from him, placed the envelope on the desk, the one I found in the mailbox, opened, handled, not by me. He didn't touch it right away. He looked at me first, and that's when I understood something important. He wasn't just looking at the documents. He was looking at me, evaluating, measuring, trying to understand how much I already knew. "How long have you suspected something?" he asked. Simple question, but not an easy one. I thought about it, really thought, because suspicion isn't always a moment. Sometimes it's a series of small realizations you choose to ignore. "I think," I said slowly, "I just started paying attention."
He nodded, like that answer told him everything he needed to know. Then he reached for the envelope. He pulled out the paper, looked at it carefully. Not quickly, not casually. Every line, every number, every detail. And then he stopped. Just for a second. A small pause. But I saw it. "This account," he said, tapping lightly on the paper, "isn't new." I felt something shift. Subtle, but definite. "How old?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned the paper toward me, pointed to a date. 3 years ago. The number sat there, still, unmoving, but it felt like it had weight. Because 3 years ago, my life had changed. My husband had passed. Everything had been rearranged. "This account has been active," Martin continued, "with regular deposits. Regular, consistent, planned. And withdrawals," he added. I didn't react, not outwardly, but inside, something tightened. "Withdrawals to where?" I asked. Martin leaned back slightly, studied the paper again, then looked at me. "That," he said, "is where things get interesting." Interesting. Such a simple word, for something that didn't feel simple at all. He turned his computer screen toward me, pulled up records, detailed, precise, cold. And there it was. Transaction after transaction. Money moving, regularly, consistently, predictably, but not to me. I leaned forward slightly, not too much, just enough, because I needed to see it clearly. The destination account.
The one receiving the money. It wasn't unfamiliar. Not entirely. That's when I realized something I should have noticed sooner. The last name. It matched mine. But the first name wasn't. Claire. I didn't speak, didn't move, didn't react, because I wanted to be absolutely sure. Martin watched me carefully, waiting. You know her? He asked. I nodded. Once. My daughter-in-law. The words felt different now. Not warmer, not familiar, just accurate. Martin didn't look surprised. That was the second thing I noticed. There's more, he said. Of course there was. There's always more. He clicked again, pulled up another set of documents. Legal, structured, official. Power of attorney, he said. The words landed quietly, but they echoed. I frowned slightly, not because I didn't understand the term, but because I didn't remember signing anything like that. This was filed about 2.5 years ago, he continued. 2.5 years. I searched my memory. Slowly. Carefully. Paperwork. After the funeral. Documents. Forms. So many forms. That's when I realized I had signed things. A lot of things. But I hadn't read all of them. Because I trusted. And trust has a cost. This document, Martin said, pointing to the screen, grants financial authority. Authority. Control. Access. Declare, he added.
I sat back in my chair, not abruptly, just slowly, because everything was starting to make sense. The missing mail, the controlled information, the account I never saw. It wasn't random. It wasn't accidental. It was structured, planned, and executed over time. This wasn't just about money, I said. This was about control, and I had handed it over myself, without knowing. Can this be reversed? I asked. Martin didn't answer immediately. He leaned back, folded his hands, looked at me, and for the first time there was something different in his expression. Not concern, not surprise, strategy. Yes, he said. A pause. But there it was. There will be consequences. Of course there would be. There always are. I nodded slowly, because by then I understood something clearly. This wasn't going to be quiet anymore, and once I moved forward, there would be no going back. I looked at the screen one more time, at the numbers, at the name, at the pattern that had been hidden from me for so long. Then I leaned back, took a breath, and said, "Good," because for the first time I wasn't reacting, I was deciding, and Claire had no idea what was coming next. Martin didn't rush me out of his office. That was the first thing that felt unusual. Most appointments like that end quickly. A summary, a plan, a handshake. But he didn't stand up. He didn't close the folder. He just watched me, like he was waiting for something. "You don't seem surprised," he said. Not accusing, just observing. I folded my hands in my lap, looked at the documents again, at Claire's name, at the neat, clean structure of something that had been built without me noticing. "I think I've been surprised for a while," I said, "and I just didn't know it yet." He nodded slowly, like that confirmed something for him. Then he leaned forward slightly. "Before we do anything," he said, "you need to understand how this works." Works. Such a simple word for something that had quietly reshaped my life. "She didn't just take money," he continued. "She created a system." A system. That word stayed with me because systems don't happen by accident. They're built, maintained, protected. That's when I realized this wasn't impulsive. It wasn't emotional. It was deliberate. "She used the power of attorney," Martin said, tapping the document lightly, "to redirect funds legally." Legally. Another word that felt heavy. "On paper," he added, "everything looks clean." Of course it does, because people like Claire don't make obvious mistakes. They don't take risks they can't control. But, he paused. There it was again.
That word. It depends on intent. Intent, meaning, purpose. If we can prove that you didn't fully understand what you signed. He let the sentence hang. Didn't finish it. Didn't need to. That's when I realized this wasn't just about what happened. It was about what could be proven. I leaned back slightly, not to retreat, just to think, because this wasn't a reaction anymore. This was a decision. What happens if we do nothing? I asked. Martin didn't hesitate. She keeps control. Simple, direct, final. And if we act, a pause, measured, calculated. We take everything back, everything. But then, another pause, and she'll know. Of course she would. I nodded slowly, because that was the part that mattered. Not the money, not the accounts. The moment she realized I wasn't who she thought I was. Good, I said again. Martin studied me for a second longer. Then something shifted. Then we don't move immediately, he said. I frowned slightly, not confused, just curious. We prepare first. Prepare. That's when I realized he was thinking several steps ahead. If we act too quickly, he continued, she can move funds, close accounts, cover tracks. Of course. She thinks you don't know, he added. And there it was. The advantage. Then we let her keep thinking that, I said. A small silence. Then, for the first time, Martin smiled. Exactly.
I left his office with a folder. Not thick, not dramatic, but precise. Every document, every record, every piece of something that had been hidden in plain sight. The sky outside was brighter than I expected. Clear, still, ordinary. And that felt strange, because nothing about this was ordinary anymore. I got into my car, closed the door, sat there for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, not starting the engine, because something had changed. Not just what I knew, but how I was thinking. Before, I would have confronted her, asked questions, looked for explanations. Now I understood something different. People like Claire don't respond to questions. They respond to consequences. I started the engine, slowly pulled out, drove home. The house felt the same. Of course it did. Furniture doesn't change overnight. Walls don't shift. But I did. I placed the folder on the kitchen table, opened it, looked at the documents again. Dates, transfers, signatures, patterns. It was all there. Everything I needed. And yet, I didn't feel the urge to act. Not yet. That's when I realized something important. Control isn't just about having power. It's about knowing when to use it. I closed the folder, placed it neatly beside the mail. The same drawer, the same space. But now, I knew exactly what was missing. That evening, David called. I talked to my assistant, he said. His voice carried a slight tension. Not panic, but close. And? There are records, he said. Transfers, monthly. Everything lines up. Of course it does. Mom? He hesitated. I waited. Didn't help him, didn't guide him. I don't understand how you didn't receive it. There it was, the beginning of doubt. I don't either, I said. And I meant it, just not in the way he thought. Silence. Then, maybe we should all sit down and go through it together, he suggested. Together. That word felt misplaced. That might be a good idea, I said. Because now, I wanted that conversation, just not for the reasons he thought. Claire texted me later that night. Short, polite, perfectly normal. Hope you're doing well. Let me know if you need anything. I looked at the message for a long time, because the words themselves weren't the point. It was the timing. That's when I realized she was checking, testing, trying to see if anything had changed. I didn't reply immediately. I waited. 10 minutes, 20. Then I typed back. I'm fine. Sent. Nothing more. Because I wanted her to feel it. That small shift, that absence of warmth,
that quiet distance. The next morning, I opened the mailbox again, not because I expected something new, but because now it wasn't just a routine. It was part of something larger. I reached inside, pulled out the envelopes, bills, advertisements, and then another one, thick, unmarked, already opened. I froze, just for a second, because this time it wasn't subtle. It wasn't hidden. It was obvious, deliberate, like someone had stopped trying to be careful, or like someone thought they didn't need to anymore. I held the envelope in my hand, felt the edges, the crease, the slight tear along the top, and that's when I realized something that changed everything. This wasn't just about money anymore. Someone was still doing this, right now, and that meant I wasn't just uncovering the past, I was stepping into something that hadn't finished yet. I looked down at the paper inside, didn't open it, not yet, because suddenly a new question surfaced. Not what happened, but who still thinks I won't notice? I closed the mailbox slowly, turned back toward the house, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was catching up. I felt like I was getting ahead, because whoever was doing this was about to find out. I had been paying attention all along.
I didn't open the envelope right away. That was the first decision I made, not out of hesitation, out of control. I carried it back to the house slowly, the paper resting lightly between my fingers, as if it didn't weigh anything at all. But it did. Not physically. Something else. I placed it on the kitchen table, next to the folder Martin had given me. Two separate things. Two parts of the same story. And for a moment, I just stood there, looking at it. Because something didn't sit right. Not just the fact that it was opened, but how it was opened. The tear wasn't clean, not careful. Not like someone trying to hide what they'd done. It was rushed, slightly uneven, like someone didn't expect it to matter. That's when I realized something had changed. Before, whoever was doing this had been careful, precise, controlled. Now, they weren't, which meant one of two things. Either they were getting sloppy, or they thought I still wasn't paying attention. I sat down, pulled the envelope closer, opened it the rest of the way. Inside, a statement, different from the others, more detailed, more recent. I scanned the numbers, the layout, the formatting, and then I saw it. A transfer. Not months ago, not weeks ago, yesterday. I didn't move, didn't react, because that one detail changed everything. This wasn't just something that had happened. It was still happening. Right now. That's when I realized I wasn't uncovering a finished story. I was standing in the middle of it. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes for a second, because now timing mattered. Every decision, every move. If I acted too soon, she could adjust. If I waited too long, she could disappear everything. Balance, that was the word. I opened my eyes, looked at the statement again. The amount was larger than usual. That stood out, not because of the number, but because of the pattern. Up until now, everything had been consistent, predictable. This wasn't. This was different. That's when I realized something had triggered this, a reaction. To what? I thought back, slowly, carefully. The dinner, the conversation, David asking about the account, my answer, the silence, Claire leaving the room, her message later that night, I'm fine, my reply, short, distant. And then the next morning, this, a larger transfer, rushed, unhidden. That's when it became clear. She was moving faster because something had changed, because she felt it, the shift, not in the situation, in me. I stood up, walked to the sink, turned on the water, not because I needed to, but because I needed a moment to think without sitting still. Water has a way of doing that.
It gives you something to focus on, something steady, while everything else starts to move. I turned it off, drying my hands. Then I made a decision. Not a big one, a small one, but the kind that matters. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. Because now I had something better. Time and information. I picked up my phone, scrolled, stopped. Martin. I didn't call. Not immediately. Instead, I took a picture of the statement. Clear, focused, complete. Then I sent it. No message, just the image. Because I didn't need to explain. He would understand. The reply came faster than I expected. 3 words. Call me now. I didn't wait. I pressed the button. He answered on the first ring. Where did you get this? He asked, straight to the point. In my mailbox, I said. A pause. Not long, but enough. Today? Yes. Another pause. This one, heavier. That's not supposed to happen, he said. Not supposed to, which meant something had slipped. That's when I realized this wasn't just her plan anymore. It was starting to break. She's accelerating, Martin said. The word landed precisely. Accelerating. She's moving funds faster than before. I didn't respond, because I already knew that, but hearing it confirmed something. She thinks something's wrong, he added. Of course she does. She doesn't know what, I said. Yet. Silence. Then, you're right. I walked slowly through the house as we spoke, from the kitchen to the hallway to the living room, each step grounding me. What do we do? I asked, not because I didn't have an idea, but because I wanted to hear his. We wait, he said. Wait, of course, but not for long. There it was, the balance again. We need one more thing, he continued. I stopped walking. What? Proof of intent. Intent, that word again. She has legal authority, he said, but if we can show misuse. He didn't finish, didn't need to. I looked down at the phone in my hand, then at the house around me, at everything that had felt stable for so long, and suddenly didn't. How do we get that? I asked.
A pause. Then, carefully, he answered, we let her make a mistake. I didn't speak, because I understood exactly what that meant. People like Claire don't stop on their own. They continue. They push. They take more. Until something stops them, or until they go too far. That's when I realized I didn't need to expose her. I just needed to let her continue. I can do that, I said, and for the first time, there was no hesitation in my voice. That evening, I did something different. I didn't check the mail again. I didn't review the documents. I didn't sit in silence. I cooked dinner, set the table, turned on the lights. Normal, routine, predictable. Because now I understood something clearly. If she was watching, she needed to see exactly what she expected. Nothing had changed. Later that night, my phone buzzed. A message from Claire. I was thinking maybe we should stop by tomorrow just to check in. Check in, of course. I stared at the message because now I could see it clearly. She wasn't checking on me. She was checking the situation. I typed back, of course, that would be nice. Sent. And as I placed the phone down, I felt something settle inside me. Calm, focused, ready. Because tomorrow she was coming here, into this house, into this space, thinking she was still in control, and I was going to let her believe that, just a little longer. Because the next move was hers, and I had a feeling she was about to make exactly the mistake we needed. I didn't rush out of bed. That was intentional. I moved slowly, carefully, because today wasn't about reacting. It was about watching. I made coffee. Same mug, same routine, same quiet kitchen. But something was different. Not outside, inside. That's when I realized I wasn't waiting for answers anymore. I was waiting for behavior. Claire was coming, and I needed to see exactly what she would do when she thought nothing had changed. I didn't check the folder, didn't review the documents, didn't look at the statement again.
because I already knew enough. What I needed now was confirmation. They arrived earlier than expected. That was the first sign. Not 10 minutes late, not even on time. Early. I glanced at the clock, then at the door. Claire knocked. Not rang. Knocked. That was new. I opened the door, smiled, just enough. "Hi," she said. Her voice was soft, careful, measured. David stood slightly behind her, watching, always watching now. "Come in," I said, and as they stepped inside, I felt it again, that shift. But this time, it wasn't coming from me, it was coming from her. We sat in the living room, not the dining table. That was my choice, because the dining table felt too structured, too formal. This was more open, more revealing. Claire sat first, crossed her legs, placed her purse beside her, not on the floor, on the couch, close. That was the second sign. David remained standing for a second longer, then sat across from me. "Mom," he said, "we just wanted to check in." Check in again. I nodded. "That's kind of you," I said, and I meant it, because kindness can look very convincing. Claire leaned slightly forward. "Have you had a chance to look into the account?" she asked. There it was. She didn't say your account. She didn't say your money. She said the account. Detached, neutral, controlled. "I've been thinking about it," I replied. That was true, just not in the way she expected. Silence. Short. Measured. Then, she smiled. "Sometimes these things take time," she said. Time. That word again. But this time, it sounded like a suggestion or a warning. David shifted slightly in his seat. "I just want to make sure everything's okay," he added. And for a moment, I believed him. Not fully, but enough, because his confusion was real. He wasn't the one controlling this. He was just part of it. "I'm fine," I said. Same words, different meaning. Claire's eyes flicked toward me, quick, sharp, then away. That was the third sign. That's when I realized she wasn't here to check on me. She was here to check for damage. "Would you like some coffee?" I asked. Normal, routine, safe. "Yes, please," she said. Of course she did. I stood up, walked into the kitchen, not rushing, not hesitating. And then I did something small, something she wouldn't expect. I left my phone on the counter, screen facing up, unlocked, because I wanted to see something. I poured the coffee, 2 cups, took my time, listened, and that's when I heard it. Footsteps, soft, careful, behind me. I didn't turn around. I didn't react, because I already knew who it was. Claire stopped near the counter. Close. Too close. That's when I realized she couldn't help herself. She wasn't just managing the situation. She was monitoring it. I kept my movements steady, poured the second cup, set the spoon down, and in the reflection of the microwave door, I saw her. Her eyes, not on me, on the phone, just for a second. Then her hand moved, slow, deliberate. She picked it up. My phone. I felt something settle inside me. Cold, clear, certain. She glanced at the screen. Quick. Scanning. Looking for something. Messages. Calls. Anything. That's when I realized she was trying to see how much I knew. I turned slightly. Not fully. Just enough. "Oh, did you need something?" I asked. Calm. Neutral. She froze. Just for a second. Then smiled. "Just checking the time," she said. Of course. She placed the phone back down, exactly where it had been. Too carefully. I nodded.
handed her the coffee, and for a moment, we stood there, close, quiet. Then she turned, walked back into the living room, and I stayed in the kitchen just a second longer, because that was it. That was the mistake. Not the money, not the transfers. This, the behavior, the need to check, to control, to verify.
That's when I realized we didn't need more evidence. We needed one moment, and I had just seen it. I picked up my phone, locked it, and smiled, just slightly, because now everything was about to change. I walked back into the living room, sat down, looked at both of them, and for the first time, I wasn't pretending. "I think," I said slowly, "we should all sit down tomorrow." Claire's smile didn't move, but her eyes did. "About what?" she asked. I held her gaze, just long enough, to go over everything. Silence. David nodded. "Yeah," he said, "that makes sense." Claire didn't speak, but I could see it, the calculation, the adjustment, because now she knew. Not everything, but enough. And tomorrow, she would try to fix it, or hide it, or move it, and whichever she chose would be exactly what we needed. Because now, she wasn't ahead anymore, she was reacting, and that was where people like her make their biggest mistakes. I didn't rush. That was important. I moved slowly through the house, adjusted small things, straightened the cushions, wiped the counter. Not because they needed it, but because I needed everything to feel normal, predictable, controlled. Because if she walked into chaos, she would adjust. But if she walked into calm, she would relax. And that's when people make mistakes.
Martin had called earlier. Not long, just enough. "We're ready," he said. Ready. Such a simple word, but it carried weight. "Everything is in place," he added. I didn't ask for details, because I didn't need them. I trusted him, the same way I had once trusted her. That thought stayed with me longer than it should have. They arrived exactly on time. That was new again. Claire stepped out first, but this time, she didn't smile right away. That was the first crack. David followed, more serious than usual, more aware. "Hi," I said, opening the door. Simple, neutral. "Hi," Claire replied, but her voice was tighter, careful, measured. We moved into the dining room. This time, I chose the table, the one I had set so many times before, the one that had held years of conversations, and now would hold something else. I didn't serve food. That was intentional. No distractions, no routines to hide behind. We sat, 3 chairs, 3 people, and something invisible sitting between us. David spoke first. "I brought the documents," he said. He placed a folder on the table, not looking at Claire. That was new. Claire's hand rested lightly on the edge of the table, fingers still, too still. That's when I realized she didn't know what he had. I folded my hands in front of me, looked at both of them, then at the folder. "I think we should start simple," I said. My voice didn't change, didn't need to. "What account?" I continued. "Are we talking about?" David opened the folder, pulled out papers, statements, records, everything he had. "This one," he said, sliding them toward me. I didn't touch them, not yet. Instead, I looked at Claire, and for a moment, she looked back. Then she smiled. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said. There it was. Not denial, not explanation. Control. "I don't think so," I replied, and I let the silence sit there, because silence is where the truth starts to show. David frowned slightly. "Claire," he said, "these transfers are real." She didn't look at him. She looked at me. And that's when I saw it. Not fear, calculation. She was thinking, adjusting, rewriting. "I handled some of the financial management after your dad passed," she said. Her tone was smooth, rehearsed, to make things easier. Easier. That word felt familiar, because I had used it myself, for years. "I see," I said.
And I meant it, because now I did. David leaned forward. But why didn't Mom receive anything? He asked. Claire hesitated, just for a second. Then she answered. It was being reinvested. Reinvested. That's when I realized she was building a story. One that sounded reasonable. One that almost worked. Almost. Into your account? I asked. Simple. Direct. Her eyes flicked, just for a moment. Then, back to calm. It's still your money, she said. Still. That word mattered. Then why is it in your name? I asked. Silence. This time, longer. David looked between us. Wait, what? He said. There it was. The shift. The moment he stepped into it. Claire's posture changed. Slightly. More rigid. Claire? He asked again. She didn't answer immediately. Because now, the story wasn't enough. That's when I reached into the folder beside me. Not his. Mine. The one Martin had given me. I placed it on the table, opened it, and slowly turned it toward them. Documents, records, dates, everything. That's when I realized this wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about showing it. Claire's eyes moved across the page, faster this time, and for the first time, she didn't smile. David leaned in, looked, then looked again. What is this? He asked, his voice different now. Not confused, concerned, because now he could see it. All of it. The pattern, the transfers, the name, Claire's name. That's when I realized there was no going back. Claire sat back slightly. Her hand moved toward her purse. Stopped. Too late. David turned to her. Is this true? He asked. No anger. Not yet. Just expectation. Waiting.
Claire opened her mouth, then closed it. And in that moment, everything shifted, because silence was no longer protection. It was exposure. I leaned back, watched, didn't interfere, because this was the part that mattered. Not what I said, but what she did next. And I could see it. She was running out of space, running out of control. And when people like her run out of control, they make choices, fast ones, desperate ones, and whatever she chose next would decide everything. Because now, she knew. I wasn't guessing anymore. I knew everything, and she knew that I knew. And that was where the real story was about to begin. David sat still for a moment, the silence of the room broken only by the hum of the refrigerator in the distance. He stared at the empty doorway where Claire had disappeared, then back down at the folder of documents spread out across the dining table. The numbers were undeniable. The signatures were clear. The pattern of deception had been mapped out in black and white, leaving no room for doubt. Mom, he began, his voice barely more than a whisper. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know. I looked at him, seeing the genuine shock and hurt etched into his features. He wasn't a conspirator. He had simply been a pawn in someone else's well-orchestrated game, blinded by his own trust and busy life. I reached across the table and placed a steady hand over his. I know you didn't, David, I said softly. He looked down at his phone, which had remained silent on the table. What do we do now? We wait, I replied, exactly as Martin had advised, and let the system do its work.
The evening passed in a quiet, contemplative haze. For the first time in years, the heavy cloud of doubt that had hung over my daily life was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp, and empowering clarity. The house was no longer a stage, and I was no longer an actor playing a scripted role. The next morning, the quiet suburban neighborhood bustled with its usual morning energy. The street outside was alive with the sound of cars passing and the chatter of neighbors, but inside my home, the air was still and focused. I made my coffee, black, no sugar, in the white porcelain mug, and walked to the kitchen window. The mailbox at the end of the street was visible through the glass. I didn't rush to check it. I didn't need to. My phone rang. The screen displayed Martin's name. I answered on the first ring. "Good morning," Martin said, his voice as steady as ever. "I have an update. Claire tried to access the offshore accounts late last night, but the freeze holds. She's currently reaching out to her representation, but they are advising caution given the weight of the forged power of attorney documentation." "I see," I said, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "She reached out to me last night as well." "Oh?" Martin paused, his voice sharpening with professional curiosity. "What did she say?" "She wanted to talk," I said calmly, but I didn't reply. "A wise move," Martin approved. "It is best to let the legal proceedings take the lead now. We are filing the formal petition to unfreeze and restore your assets to your primary account this afternoon." "Thank you, Martin," I said. "You're very welcome. We will meet tomorrow at my office to finalize the paperwork and prepare for the initial hearing next week." We said our goodbyes and hung up. I set the phone on the kitchen counter, right beside the folder containing the truth of the last 3 years. The house was quiet, but it was no longer the quiet of a place where secrets were kept. It was the quiet of a home that belonged entirely to me again. I walked to the front door, unlocked it, and stepped onto the porch. The morning air was crisp and fresh. I looked down the block, taking in the neat lawns and the neighborhood rhythm. Every detail was the same as it had been yesterday, and yet everything had changed. I was no longer adjusting or adapting. I was in complete control, and this time I wasn't going to miss a single detail.